Welcome, warriors.
Yay.
We are psyched to be chatting with all of you again today.
Yeah, we're new. It's new. It's new us. New year, new us. We're totally
Right.
different people.
100% different. It's
Yeah.
like I woke up 2023. It was like, who is this person? I'm looking at the mirror. I felt just completely different. It's like when you have your birthday, right? You wake up and all of a sudden you're a totally different person.
You're in a new year. It's a new you. We get two new year, new yous every year. This is crazy.
It's stressful.
Yeah.
It's giving me light anxiety. Just thinking about it, please. Okay. All right. So, warriors, today we're going to be sharing a little bit about anxiety and navigating health issue stuff or things in the health realm.
Yeah.
But, not wanting to, quote, make a big deal out of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why we address or choose not to address or wait to address various things that we're dealing with, because we feel like otherwise we'll be viewed as crazy or something's wrong with us, and we don't want to be stigmatized or be labeled.
Right. Women are hysterical.
Right.
They overreact all the time. Don't
Over
do that.
emotional.
Yeah. And so don't, portray the stigma. Like, don't do it. Lock it up, lock it in. You're probably fine. Don't make a big deal out of it,
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was like thinking about this, right, you and I were talking a bit, and I had shared with you that we can talk about this in so many different ways, right?
Yeah.
Like we've talked about in the past, like, being like harassed at work, and we could talk about not wanting to make a big deal out of that because we might come off emotional, hysterical, crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in friendship, someone says something you don't like, but is it worth making a big deal out of to have a difficult conversation, right? And so I feel like it applies to so many. So we'll probably have follow-up episodes about, the fear of not wanting to make a big deal out of stuff. Yeah. Even though most of these things do actually, like, they deserve to be had a deal out of. They deserve to be made a deal out of, whatever that means, right? Made a big deal of. But today, we're going to focus on just really like how to navigate, like when your body is saying, hey, something's wrong, but you're like, wait a second, is there actually something wrong? Or is my anxiety spiking and I don't want to go get help because it's probably nothing. I'm probably making a big deal out of nothing.
Yeah. When you said that twice in the last few moments of like, it's probably nothing, I felt really triggered by that in the sense that it's just like, that is so the narrative in my head is that it's probably nothing. And it's like, I don't really know exactly where I formed that narrative. I just know that that's the narrative is I should probably not worry about this because it's nothing. And maybe some of it is just like my anxiety doesn't want to think about it being worse than it maybe is.
Right.
And so I'm like protecting myself in a way by saying, tell yourself it's nothing, Margot. So that way it will be nothing, right?
Right.
Make it into nothing, force it to be nothing. But then sometimes your body actually says, it's like, the ambulance sirens are going off. Like, it's not nothing.
Right.
Pay attention to me,
please,
whether it be emotional or physical.
Right.
I'm here giving you these signals to your brain.
Yeah.
Why are you ignoring me? And eventually I'm not going to let you keep ignoring me.
Exactly. Now it's going to be way worse because you let it get out of hand. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And the emotional can sometimes then trigger the physical or vice versa. Right. So like, what's the narrative for you? Like like I said, when you said that, it's like, oh yeah, that is 100% where my mind goes immediately.
Yeah.
So like, is it similar or is it a little different?
It's everything, right? It's like, what is the narrative for me when it's like about getting help, right? Like there's a different narrative there than what is the narrative when is there something actually wrong with my body, right? Like those are two different narratives. Asking for help because of my health is a very vulnerable place to be. And am I making a big deal out of nothing? And then also, right. And then what you were saying was that, and if there is something wrong, then I actually have to kind of deal with that. And when it comes to health, if you don't have your health, your whole life changes. Right. And so in some ways it's easier to like push it under the rug. And it's like, it's probably fine because so far, right? Like the patterns that we have of the past is it's been fine.
Right.
Right. And so we have that to kind of, so I feel like I relate to your narrative. I also feel like some of the things that I've read also prevent me from not wanting to make a big deal. Like, you know, it's been well documented that in the medical field, women are often more turned away than men. Right. And so male and a female might go for the same exact symptoms, and the woman is overreacting when she's like actually having a heart attack. Right.
Yeah.
And then the other like thing in the medical field is that for so long they only studied men and like male rats. They didn't want women's hormones to like affect their studies. But
God forbid we be observed, so we can have healthcare.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we still have our hormones, whether you observe them or not, right? But that's actually led to like, and I'm saying heart attack because this kind of goes into the story I'm going to tell. Where like they have classic symptoms for a heart attack. You know, you have tingling in your arm, there's pain in your chest on the left side, right? But turns out for heart disease and heart attack in women, it's actually different. Like a woman might have digestive issues. Or there was this one woman who had pain in her jaw, and it turns out she had really bad heart disease that was leading to a heart attack, right? And so my point in all that is that I also have the narrative that even if I go get help, I won't be taken seriously because I'm a woman.
Yeah. Wow.
Right.
Totally. Yeah. I will also inherit that narrative. No, but it is really true. And like the more you're talking about it in the well-documented history, you know, and the same is true for just the well-documented history of women being labeled as one thing or another. Like you said a few times, like, you know, crazy or the symptoms aren't as important. They're not certainly worthy of study and observation.
You're probably just like, on your period. It's probably just your period.
Right.
Everything is just a woman's period. That's why she's hysterical.
Yeah. I mean, but like, if you think about it, and there's plenty of research to back it up, like according to 19th century, you know, psychiatry, female independence was labeled madness. It's true.
Oh my God.
True. I mean, just the idea of like a housewife standing up for herself is labeled a crazy person. Like I read this article in Time magazine, I pulled it up, and it's about Elizabeth Packard, and it's from 1860. And she was put into an insane asylum because her husband, quote, felt like she was out of control. He basically was like, he looked up what it would take to basically incarcerate his wife because she was standing up to him, her domineering husband. And all it said was, oh, all you have to do is be a man and request that your wife be incarcerated for madness. And it was basically the woman's choice was either to submit, right, to be reconditioned, quote unquote, in this asylum, or to live out a sentence. And what this woman found out was when she was incarcerated in this insane asylum, and she was completely sane, by the way, of course, was that the majority of the women in this facility were there for similar, if not the same exact reason, that all of them were sane. But at the end of the day, it was like the joke's on the man, because the more of them that were able to connect with each other in these extremely thick, isolating walls, they were able to be like, actually, right? It actually helped them realize like, oh, we're not crazy. Look at all of us, right? All of us are. Why are you here? Because you were reading. Okay. Yeah. That must mean that you're insane. That must mean that you're, anti-feminine and need to be reconditioned. And so like, it just goes to the greater point of like, maybe it's messages like that, right? That we've all received for like a millennium, pretty much, that what we go through isn't worth study. It isn't worth, curiosity, and
it isn't
attention.
Worth taken seriously. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It's enraging simultaneously as it is heartbreaking and same thing with suffragettes, right? Again, this could be a whole rabbit hole, but it's like, oh, women must be insane for wanting equal rights to have a vote,
Right.
say on who, represents them in their county, their state, their country. So yeah, anywho, moving on. All right. So I'm excited to hear more about like why this topic really meant something to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to like hit on what you just said though, and then I'll dive in. It's like hysterical, funny, amusing, horrible, demoralizing. Like, I mean, there's so many different feelings that came up with like that story you just shared, but it really just hits home like all of the generations and generations and generations of trauma that go through women because for so long we were property. Like, even like, this is so off topic and then I'll get into my story, but Dan and I were talking and making jokes about the patriarchy the other day. And then somehow we remembered that, like, what is it like on a farm when you take care of animals? It's husbandry.
Animal husbandry. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was talking to my husband. Like, I mean, where does that word come from? We were at some point animals, just like animals on the farm, even though we were humans.
Yeah.
Right. And so anyway, like when you were saying that, it's just like, oh my God, how it's not just like society that's given us the messages to not listen to our body for like 30 years or 50 years. It's like you said, like millennia, right? It's like,
right. Yeah. It's literally forever. And also like my last thought on it is just like, if the idea that independence and ambition and, assertion for women is unnatural, right? Then therefore it's like, oh, you're sick. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, you're a sick person. It's like just thinking about these two things that were being lumped together at this time and that, got perpetuated since.
Yeah.
It's just like, and people wonder why we're all still so frustrated with the lack of the glacial pace of progress for all people, right? But for women specifically, certainly for people of color, for women of color specifically, it's just, yeah. Anyway,
yes. So
okay,
this all leads up to that I had a health scare recently, and it was really challenging for me to know what to do because of all the messages we talked about at the beginning. Because was I making a big deal out of it? Was it my anxiety making a big deal out of it? Right? You know how sometimes you just can't trust yourself because you're like, wait, is this true, or is this my anxiety overreacting and making intrusive thoughts and everything possibly worse? Right. So basically what happened was this all like started on a Thursday, right? And it was so weird in the sense that I felt off, and I'm pretty in touch with my body where I can explain like, oh, I have a throbbing pain or a shooting pain or a tingle. Like I can use the language to describe how I feel. Oh, I have a light fever. I feel like I have a high fever. Right. And it felt so hard to find language. I felt like lightly dizzy. Right. Not dizzy, but a relative to dizzy, and lightly lightheaded, but not lightheaded. Right. And kind of weak, but it's not really weak. And I would just be sitting there and like the waves of it would happen, which was really weird. I'd just be sitting there and then I'd feel like lightly dizzy or lightly lightheaded. And then also when I would be sitting there, my heart rate would just randomly spike up to 130, which is tachycardia, right? And so it's like this, for no reason. I'm not working out. I'm not going up and down stairs. I'm not doing anything. And I would be sitting there and my heart rate would just spike. And then on top of that, I had some like stomach issues too. So I'm like, all right, maybe I'm fighting something, a virus, a bacteria. Maybe I'm just fighting something. I'm going to take it easy, take care of myself, give myself permission to rest, right? Friday, I'm starting to feel this way again, right? And again, like the most unnerving part was where I would just be sitting there or laying there and my heart rate would go from like 70 to 130 and back down.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen a lot, but it happened a few times throughout the day. And every time it happened, it was terrifying. It's like, why is this happening? And I just want to say, like, I have an Apple Watch and I really appreciate that I have an Apple Watch because the data helped me see clearly.
I was about to ask, I'm like, how did you know the numbers? Like, was this is this what you're going to get into after, like when you learned about the spike, or was it just that you could feel it, but just actually having the physical number there available to you? Yeah.
Yes.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And I haven't had the Apple Watch very long. It's, like a month old, but it was enough data to show that for weeks, my heart rate was normal. And then all of a sudden it was spiking, and it has like an EKG or an ECG on it. So I kept taking my ECGs or whatever, or EKGs from the watch. And it kept saying like, you're in sinus rhythm, which is the good rhythm. Right. So I'm like, okay, I'm not having arrhythmia. I'm not dying. Right. So it was showing me that I was okay, but also something was wrong. So Friday, same feeling. So I'm like, okay, this is weird. But if I still keep feeling this way by Monday, I'll call my doctor. Right. Keep telling myself I'm probably just fighting something. So often I'm fighting something. Well, I'm not fighting something so often, but so often in the past, if I'm fighting something, it usually passes within a few days. Saturday, same thing. I'm like in bed a lot of the day because it's just so, I'm like, if I walk the dogs, am I going to faint? Right. Like, I just don't know. And I wasn't fainting, but it was like the feeling that maybe I could faint. So by Sunday, I'm like, all right, I guess I'll call my doctor and see what I should do. Sunday night, Dan and I are watching A Man Called Ove, which was the movie adaptation by the book by one of my favorite authors, Frederick Bachman. And I was really excited to see it. It's a Swedish film, right? Like, I was super excited about it. We're sitting there, and like twice, like I keep getting these waves of feeling malaise. That was the best way I could like put it, right? Like just malaise. And then my heart rate was spiking twice, and I was like showing Dan. He was like, maybe we should go to a clinic. And the whole time I'm so resistant because I don't want to make a big deal out of this. This is probably nothing, right? Like, I'm young, right? Like, my body wouldn't have serious issues. Like, I can keep telling you all the narratives I was telling myself. I don't want to, get a big bill for nothing. I don't want to waste my time Sunday evening for nothing. Right. Like, I don't want to go there and then be dismissed because I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Right.
Yeah.
All those narratives. So there's like a clinic near us that it closes at like 11, and they require a telehealth call ahead of time to see if it's worth coming to the clinic. And so at like 10 o'clock, I'm speaking to this random doctor I've never met before, and I'm telling him my symptoms, and he is like, you should go to the ER. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
He would reassure me it's no big deal. Right. I was like, that was my like looking for reassurance. It's no big deal. And he was like, it sounds like thyroid, and you're definitely like having like some, I don't remember if he said arrhythmia or tachycardia or both or something like that, but he was like, you should go. So I like go downstairs. I'm like almost in tears because I still feel mostly okay. But then it's like, oh my God, what if I am having symptoms for a heart attack? Right. Like, what? Also, like, Dan has to work the next day. Like, I don't want to be at the ER until like 6 a.m. Again, like going to the ER, like, fortunately we have insurance, but you still know they slap you with a high bill and charge like $1 billion for a Tylenol, right? So there's all these thoughts. So we go to the ER. Luckily, there's no one in the waiting room. I'm seen pretty quickly. They hook me up to an EKG. I'm seen within like probably about 10 minutes. And then like the nurse is asking me a bunch of questions. I'm telling her about the telehealth doctor, and he thinks it's a thyroid thing or a heart thing, which is why he told me to come. And she's like, so do you have anxiety? And I was like, yeah, girl, I do, but this is not it. Right? I was like, yes, I know anxiety very well.
Oh my goodness.
Right. But I imagine some people don't know what anxiety is.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
or they're told, go through the list of things that it might be before it's a quote heart problem. Or
right. Yeah. But she was asking me that while they had me hooked up to an EKG. So I knew they were taking me seriously. But like the moment when she asked about the anxiety, I was like, yes, I have a diagnosis, but it's more about like, social anxiety and being in public and public speaking. I was like,
Yeah. Good for you, girl.
I know the difference.
Yeah.
Sometimes I am a hypochondriac. This is not one, right? So it turns out, I have a thyroid issue, and this really sucks. And we'll probably have another conversation about this at some point. My blood work came back showing like my thyroid levels, like just totally out of whack. But it was showing hypothyroid. And so it was very confusing for them because in hypothyroid, it actually decreases your heart rate, not spikes it. And in hyperthyroid is when you get the tachycardia. And they were like, so we suggest you do a follow-up with your doctor. We suggest maybe going and seeing a cardiologist, blah, 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 blah. Right. And so I ended up seeing my doctor a few days later, and we did more blood work, and basically she tested like antibody. She did like deeper testing, and it does look like I have hypothyroidism, which is like Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune. Apparently it's super common, but it doesn't make me feel any better. Right.
Right. Sure.
Of course, the funny thing is after I saw my primary care physician that day, which was a Friday, so almost a week after feeling the symptoms, I started to feel better. So she had given me a prescription for thyroid meds, right? Once you start them, I mean, when you have a thyroid issue, like you're on them the rest of your life. And like, I'm like, oh God, I don't want that commitment. Right. I don't want to.
Yeah.
But
is there a less committal option?
Right. Just like a, monthly injection. So, but what was weird was that after I saw my doctor, I felt better. And then I'm like, oh my God, is this psychosomatic? Like, what's going on? But my blood levels were way off. So, so that blood work came back, and I do have thyroid antibodies, which does mean my thyroid was being attacked by my immune system.
Wow.
But because I feel okay right now, I don't have to start the meds.
Oh,
yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it'll only be if what happens, like what is the requirement for you needing to start the meds if you are comfortable sharing?
Oh, yeah. Basically, when your thyroid starts to just like have its issues, right? First of all, what her thought is that maybe it was underperforming and I went hypo, right? And then the pituitary gland was like, what's going on? What's going on? Alert. And then that made the thyroid overproduce, which then put me in hyper for the tachycardia, right? So it was like flailing. But the thing is that you can have a couple episodes and then it goes back to like normal, right?
Okay.
And in a few weeks, I might feel horrible again. In a few months, in 6 years, 10 years, right? So I don't know when I'm going to get hit with it again. And then I have to do blood work and maybe an ultrasound and all that to confirm again. But the really crazy thing is at the ER, they did blood work for me, right? And they tested my TSH level and my T4 free level, and none of that matters, right? But they were like totally out of whack, off, problem, right? Like alert, something's wrong with your thyroid in the ER blood results. And then my doctor did them and they were both within like normal range. Right. And so if I had waited to see my doctor that entire time, unless she did the antibody test, which is usually what they don't do unless there's something wrong, we might not have ever known that my thyroid is starting to have challenges.
Wow.
So that's all to say is that when I start to feel unwell again, we have to do more blood work. And then, at some point, when I'm not bouncing back is when I have to start the meds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. I mean, it's just a couple of things stood out to me when you were sharing. I mean, a lot of the early part of the story, which was just about like the lack of trust that even someone who, like you were talking about, how well you know yourself, how well you can tune to your physical and emotional needs, right? Like how you're able to label different sensations in the body. And even with all that mindfulness and mental training, right, that we both have, that you certainly have, which is such a valuable skill. Like, it's just like, yeah, it was like a mini yay in my heart where it's just like, yes, this is why we practice mindfulness, right? This is why we teach this stuff to kids and adults and all other people. But at the same time, you're just like, wow. And even if the most embodied person who with anxiety, because hey, that's us, right? That's you, that's us, can go through these big moments of self-doubt and like the ability to sort of say, well as I know myself, I still have that nagging assumption that it's probably nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And I should just not, I should just worry about all the things and all the ways I'm going to be burdening. And that was the other thought that I had in the beginning part of your story, which was just like, what a burden that we can feel like to others sometimes, including ourselves.
Right.
And it was like, I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to potentially have a ridiculous bill, which like, okay, some of that's just practicality. Again, our messed up healthcare system in this country, but separate soapbox. But yeah, I mean, and then just thinking about your husband's work schedule the next day. It's like the stuff that runs through our minds before we care for ourselves, even with all the, the understanding that we have of ourselves physically and knowing yourself as well as you do. Still, right, that moment, which was somewhat prolonged, right? There was a couple of days that went by before you even talked to anyone about it.
Right.
And so that really stood out to me, I think, as just a highly relatable moment.
Yeah.
And just in the second part, just sort of, I guess my question for you is like, what was like your stage, or were there stages of just like acceptance about this situation? Or are you still sort of in the early stages of like understanding and accepting? Are you not anywhere near there yet? Like, I guess I'm just curious. And the same I'd pose to any warrior listening. It's just like, when we get a diagnosis of some kind, even if it isn't life threatening in a, like, you're about to, we need to save your life in this moment, or something's bad's going to happen to you right now if we don't do something. But just the idea of like, okay, maybe you need meds for the rest of your life at some point. And just so like, I'm curious, like, what your emotional process has been like since receiving the diagnosis.
Yeah. Well, what I'll first say, and I think this kind of ties into even what we were saying at the beginning of like why sometimes we don't go to get seen and stuff, is before I knew it was my thyroid, but I was just feeling weak. I was feeling off. Everything was much harder to do. Pottying the dog, like just taking him outside to potty, not even a full walk. I was like telling Dan jokingly, but a little bit serious, like, I don't know, maybe you want to divorce me. Because if I don't have my health, right? If I just need to lay in bed all the time, like what kind of life is that? Right? Like that's what was going on through my mind, like, if this is a condition where the rest of my life I have general malaise, I'm not sure if I'm going to faint. Like Dan and I can't go on adventures then. I can barely take care of our dogs. Like, what kind of life is this that my health would be dooming us to? Right? I'm not, he was like, don't say that. Like, not the, like, he was like, we'll figure it out. But he was like, we're not getting a divorce. Like, we're not getting a divorce and this and that. But that was some of the thoughts I had, is like, I can't imagine living a life where I just feel like a shell of myself. And it also gave me a lot of empathy and compassion for people that do every single day live in chronic pain, have chronic fatigue. And it's so hard physically for them to function, and they still have to function in our society, right? Like, so that was what happened. And then when I got the diagnosis, most of me is pretty okay about it. I mean, I'm bummed. I like just turned 40 and then I have a thyroid issue. Like, that shit doesn't bad. It's like,
speaking of new year, new me.
Yeah, exactly. But as a whole, like when you do research about thyroid stuff, it's like really super common. Some thyroid stuff does run in my family, right? That increases your risk for thyroid stuff if someone in your family does. When I was speaking to my doctor, she was like, no, she's like, I have patients as young as 25 have thyroid stuff. She was like, if you were 16, I'd be worried. But 25 and older, it's very like common. This is what we do. She was very practiced in it,
Right.
So, I'm bummed because I feel like I feel like it's like, what could I have done for this not to happen? And what I've latched onto based on research, and this is a different topic and I won't get too far into it, but there tends to be a lot of stories of people getting COVID and within 6 months having a thyroid issue. And it could totally be a coincidence. It could. But for me, part of my narrative is like, well, if I didn't have COVID, maybe I wouldn't have this now. Right.
Yeah,
so there's a little bit of like anger, disappointment, sadness, because I had COVID about 6-7 months ago now. So that's where I'm at. It's like, all right, a lot of people have it. Like, this isn't that serious. Like, yes, I do have to, once I start the meds, that's it. We're committed. Right. But also, I have family members that have had it. They're totally fine. They're normal people living normal lives. Right. Part of me is like, oh, part of a thyroid issue is a lot of fatigue. So maybe I'll be less fatigued. Maybe other areas of my life will improve once I get on this thyroid med. Right. So there's a lot of different things that have come up since the diagnosis. But I will say is like one of the biggest things that I'm holding with me, and I'm just going to tell a really short story. When I used to work in Queens, I would always see this guy at a bodega when I would go get coffee. And we'd always be like, hey, how are you? How are you? I'd always see him on a Thursday. And his response was always, I have my health. And, I'd be like, well, what else? I was young and naive. It's like, but then after my dad got sick, I got it. I was like, you're right. If you don't have your health, what do you have? And so the other part of the narrative is, even though like this is the thyroid thing and this is autoimmune and it sucks, I still do have my health. Right. And so that's the thing I want to remember. It's like, I have my health and I can feel really grateful for that part.
Yeah. It's so funny because I just thought of like how grateful that I am, right? That you were able to gain some information at the very least. That's right. Provide. And as much as like, it's okay, it's shitty. It sucks. Like this isn't like best case scenario. Right. But it also isn't worst case scenario. And so without offering platitudes, right, we can sort of acknowledge that like, while this isn't the best, it's also not the worst. And there's so many things that can be done about it. And so like, I guess where my grateful heart comes in, it's just like, you're my friend. Obviously I don't want any health problems for you or anyone else that I love. But that, I'm grateful that you took the step to talking to someone and figuring it out, because how often do we just skip that and what would have happened? Right. And it's like the what ifs. And it's like, if you had given into all of your worries about like Dan's work schedule the next day or about, not wanting to be a burden to yourself or him or anyone, not wanting to waste your time or whatever. Like if you had just continued to give into that, maybe things would have escalated a lot quicker and you'd already be on that forever med. And so it's like, I mean, and that's maybe a little bit of a stretch, but
no, but you just, when you're saying that, you reminded me of something and it's so fucked up. It's so fucked up. But that night when we got into the car to go to the ER, I'm like saying to Dan, I don't know if I hope that there's something wrong with me or not, because I didn't want to make a big deal. And the thing is that if there wasn't something wrong with me at all, and of course I want to be healthy. Of course I don't want anything wrong with me, but that would have been information for me the next time that I probably wouldn't have sought help.
Yeah.
So there was a part of me that was hoping there was something wrong so that it could validate, oh, okay, like listening and trusting my body. Right. Yeah. Anyway, as you were just saying that about not wanting to be a burden, I remembered that conversation with Dan, which is like ridiculous. Like, do I hope there's something wrong with me? Do I not? Because either way, it feels like a lose-lose situation. Either I made a big deal out of nothing and I'm probably not going to get help the next time because how do I know I'm not making a big deal then?
Right.
Or, well, crap, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Right. It's not an ideal situation regardless.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Oh boy. Well, so it's just like, it's a really, it's a great moment of pause, I think.
Yeah.
For all of us, right? With your story, to kind of think about all the times that we dismiss something that we are experiencing, for lack of a better phrase, then to say, I should just go ahead and listen to my instinct, come what may, right? No matter what happens. If I'm experiencing something in my body that feels foreign or abnormal for you or super uncomfortable, it's just like, can we all practice, right? Even just the one step of like researching it, right? Maybe that's the first step. Maybe the second step is having a conversation with a trusted loved one or a friend. Maybe, hey, do you know anyone with these symptoms? Right. And that may not necessarily be helpful, but it might be, right? I mean, talking to people that love and trust, that you have loving, trusting relationship with, even if they just say like, oh, I had someone that had that and it was fine. Right. But hopefully that person loves and trusts you. They're not going to say, but you should just go ahead and not worry about it too. That person's going to say, well, what you right. At the end of the day, what you should do, whether it be reach out to someone professionally or continue to do research on your own, whatever it is.
But that's the bullshit piece right there. I mean, not what you're saying, but once you realize there's something wrong, like fortunately, Dan and I have health insurance, but all of the barriers in our society for someone to actually get help once there's something wrong.
Right.
They don't want
even just the ER alone, like you were saying.
Yeah.
The ER is a ridiculously expensive place to go.
Yeah. You get an ambulance, like, I mean, I met Uber. Actually, I took an Uber back from my doctor, not the ER, but from my doctor. And he was saying how he gets a lot of calls to take him to the ER these days rather than the ambulance because it's cheaper for someone to take an Uber. It's awful. But yeah, I mean, I feel you. It's like, it's acknowledging how you feel and figuring out the next step rather than ignoring it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like more pause, more options, or opportunities, to pause and say like, like even just reflecting on it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It could be a good first step for the warriors. Yeah.
So I'm curious about your story.
Yeah. Since you kind of told a really recent story, like literally really recent, because I know the warriors assume that we've been talking about your situation since it happened because we have been like, we're chatting about it with you all on the pod right now. But like, of course I knew most of what you just shared already. And was grateful that you trusted me to like, be with someone that you talked to about the experience. Of course. So, I mean, I wanted to just sort of take, I won't say the opposite kind of experience, but it was way back in the vault of my life.
Wait, you existed before 40?
Oh God. No, I mean, I know my life officially began at 40, but yes, I had the 39 years before. Wow. Also, I know, crazy. It's nuts. It's madness. Going back to madness. All right. So, what I want to share is about how I wanted to advocate for something that I needed and that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And my reasons for needing it weren't aligned with my doctor's reasons for wanting me not to have this thing. Anyway, so I'm talking about birth control. So I had never been, I have endometriosis. I've dealt with extreme menstrual pain, just like super problematic, basically since the day I got my first period. But I had always found ways to either over the counter or, non-medicinally care for myself through that process over the years. Anyway, so for kind of maybe dumb, superficial reasons, when Adam and I were getting married, my period comes like clockwork. Mm-hmm. And so I'm able to generally know exactly the day or right around the day that I'm going to get it every month. And so when we got engaged and we picked our wedding date, I saw that I would have my period when we got married. Okay. And I did not want my period when we got married because we were going to be going away for the week with close friends and family, having a destination wedding. And so I was literally going to be like at the beach all week and obviously in my wedding dress. And I just was like, that sucks.
Yeah.
And so I started researching what to do about it. Right. And so one of the options was birth control. And like, I read about how you can, how to dose it specifically, which medications were the best to go on for this type of, call it shallow, call it whatever situation. And so I
Thinking
decided,
ahead.
okay,
You were
cool.
making a plan. I wouldn't call it
Right.
shallow.
I planned for, I mean, again, it's like for all the reasons that I probably could have and would have had to go on birth control to like help sort of support me in my menstrual journey.
Yeah.
I wanted none of it. I was like, nah, I'm good. But then when it came to the idea of having my period during my wedding, I was like, nope, fuck that. So, again, this is my 27-year-old self, and that's what I wanted. And so I went into my gynecologist's office with this whole plan in mind. And um, this man was at the time, he was the man that delivered me. He was a wonderful doctor, a very sweet man he was I think he was from Hungary. I'm not sure. He had immigrated here, like, however, I mean, dozens of years ago at that point. He was in his like 70s at the time. And so I talked to him about this plan, and he was very adamant about me not. He was very adamant about me just going ahead and not. And initially I was really shocked.
Yeah.
So like I kind of went into like this like hibernated state. He was kind of talking in a very kind of formal and I think he was trying to scare me, right? Which, like, okay, I understand that there's a risk to taking lots of things. I understand that there's any risk to taking any kind of medication ever, right? And so in my head, it was like, isn't anything kind of a risk?
Yeah.
And I felt like a lot of what he was sharing were things about like family planning that I didn't have plans for, right? And he had known for a long time and also had some feelings about that as well, that he didn't kind of hide from me. But I always kind of like tossed it aside and like, I don't give a shit. I get shade from people all the time. I've been getting shade since I was 19 about not wanting to have children. And so, that was like tenfold when I brought this up to him. And so like, it took a lot of patience, and a lot of like sitting quietly and processing what he was saying before I said, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to leave today and I'll think about it. Right.
I guess I'm going to go to Planned Parenthood.
God, so like I left, and I remember having like this discomfort for like the rest of the day and the week, and like thinking to myself, well, what is this discomfort? Like I wasn't connecting it to the conversation. I just thought like, I'm just feeling my anxiety is spiking. It happens, having a rough stretch at work. Like I was kind of like shooing away my feelings about the situation and assuming that they were related to other stressful situations in my life. Right. And then, it was like a week later, and Adam was like, I feel like we didn't really talk about what happened at the doctor. And so he was like, so what's going on? Like, are you going to be on something or whatever? And I was like, no. And I kind of like, that was the first time I talked about it. I came home from the appointment. We didn't even talk about it. And it wasn't because he didn't like ask, but I think he kind of just assumed that like, it was either happening, that it was happening. Cause that was my plan. It was, I was going to go in and get this thing and it's happening. And so anyway, ultimately we realized when we discussed it that like, I was kind of, I was being suppressed. I was being oppressed in the moment by this doctor. And so it was like, shit, like I had this revelation while we were talking about it. And he was just like, well, why don't you go see someone else? And I was like, it was important to me that I go back to him and sort of confront him about the situation. And so that's what I did. I booked another appointment for like, I mean, I feel like it was wound up being a couple of weeks later, but like, again, I had still had plenty of time to figure this out. This is why you do this in advance when you want to try to skip a period or whatever. And so I went back and I confronted him about the situation, and I didn't really call him out because again, my late 20s self wasn't really there yet, even though I've always been a vocal person and opinionated person. When it comes to my health, when it came to health stuff, I always had a little bit more of like a lump in my throat. I was always a little bit more fearful of doctors and the authority that comes with doctors.
Right.
And I hadn't really spent a lot of time around folks and with people, at least not at that time in my life, that were like out there vocally advocating at doctors. And it was sort of like being raised in a culture of like, the doctor gives you a prescription, you take it. The doctor gives you advice, you follow it. And so kind of talking to him in bolder terms was a real act of bravery for me at that time. And so I wound up, and I got what I wanted, right? At the end of the day, I was like, I'm not leaving here without this. Otherwise I'm going to find a new doctor, and it is what it is. And then he was like, oh, okay. Like, and it was completely fine. Right. It was like, I feel like at that point, then I don't know, I'm assuming he didn't have any shame about the conversation we had prior, but I do think that it was like, all right, well, I gave this person left my office and didn't just like adamantly say one or the other. And so I'll assume that she took the time she needed to think about it and she's come to the same conclusion. Fine. And like everything worked out. It was fine. Right. But the reason why I wanted to tell this story is just because I feel like, and again, I'm talking about my rights as a woman, right? I'm talking about my reproductive organs and reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy and choice as far as like what happens to my female reproductive organs when I want them to happen. And so it was like, hey, I took this step to make a choice for my physical body that I wanted, regardless of how like silly or shallow or, you know, whatever it might be to some folks. To me, it was important and really, really, it was just very important to me at the time.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I'm so grateful because I wasn't in extreme doubled over pain for an entire week while I was getting married.
Right.
I was able to do what the pill was designed to help me do.
Yes.
And then I went off it after 2 years, right? Like I wasn't going to ruin my reproductive organs by staying on the pill for a ridiculous amount of time. And look, I'm not trying to stigmatize and shame women that are on the pill for however many years of their life, you know, like that is up for every person to decide for themselves. And so with that being said, I just wanted to kind of share the opposite end of the spectrum. It was like, here I was like advocating immediately for what I wanted. I had a full plan ready. And then I was being kind of like, you know, it was trying to be pushed out of my brain.
Yeah.
And so then it was about trying to find the will and the strength to say, no, I'm in charge of everything that's going on here.
Right.
Especially since there's no real issue, right? There's no medical reason why I can't do what I want, right? And you're not bringing me with anything that's like tangible, other than like big pie in the sky, like, you know, what ifs, which it's like, I don't play in what ifs, you know, not for like a short period of time.
Right.
And I was like, look, if I take the pill and it doesn't feel right, I'll go off.
Right.
Like it's a decision I can make in the moment. It's not like, oh, I'm going to commit to this for the next year or whatever, just because. It was like, let's just see what happens. If I'm uncomfortable with it, then I can make a new decision, right? I can kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out, you know, if it's worth it or not. And so, I think my big feeling about the entire situation was that like, we can't allow for outside forces, whether they be our doctors or the media or the things that we were raised with, dictate what we do with our bodies and when. Yeah.
My big feeling is I'm pretty annoyed at your story. I mean, you know, like since the whole like Roe v. Wade got overturned, like I have read so many people's personal stories about male doctors trying to dissuade women from going on birth control, right? Not even about abortion or not, but like just being on birth control, right? And it's not always even to not get pregnant. It's for some women because they have endometriosis, you know?
Exactly.
It's and so it's just you're probably the first person that I've spoken to that I didn't read an article of someone writing about. And so it's like, oh my God, this shit is real. Like
yeah. And that was so many years ago at this point. It's like, I imagine it's a million times worse in some ways, hopefully better in other ways, because there's more and more vocalization, I think, about this stuff. There's less and less, you know, suppression and silence. At least that's like one of the nice things about social media, right? Is like things that dawned from it, like the Me Too movement, like, you know, so many powerful movements that have gained steam and attention that probably never would have. And all of us would have been sort of like dealing with it behind closed doors and to ourselves and silenced because we didn't have the space or we didn't feel safe enough to bring it to the world.
Right. We didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Right. I mean, that's it. Right. I had no idea how rampant misogyny was until like more recently. Right. Like
Yeah.
I mean,
When it's literally in your face
yes, you're like,
24/7.
oh shit, this is misogyny. You don't just read about it in like what's his name? Pope in the Rape of the Lock, that author. I studied 18th century lit at some point. Pope is his last name. Anyway, he was a total misogynist, right? And it's like, oh no, it's not just an 18th century lit.
Yep.
It's in your face all the time. It's women can't make decisions for their own damn bodies. The men need to decide that, for circling it all the way back to the beginning again.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that, we have to remember, and it's not easy, right? That we have incredible amounts of agency and rights if we only just grab them and wield them.
Yeah.
And be vocal for other people who don't have the ability to speak up for themselves.
Right. Because that's the other part, is some people might not have another doctor they can go to, right? Mm-hmm. Like some people might not have other options. And if their doctor says no and won't give them a prescription, what do they do? Right. And so that's the other part, is like, we need to keep speaking up about it, mm-hmm. Because again, it's like women don't get the same rights, even when it comes to like medical attention.
And it's like if a dude wants ED medication at any age, right? I'm sure his doctor's just like, you got it, man. Here we go. Okay, you don't have a history of heart conditions in your family. I mean, like maybe it's even easier. Maybe they don't even give a shit about the man's history. They're just signing scripts. I don't know. Yeah. But I mean, if you're listening and you're a man and you've had experience with that and you feel comfortable sharing, we'd love to hear from you. Email us, DM us on Instagram. Mm-hmm. What's been your experience? Have you been gaslit by a doctor? And for what? Right? Like, what have you been gaslit for? And I mean, I'm sure that to some extent, it's not just women, right? I'm sure that men go through their own version of this, and maybe other areas of life, and less about healthcare stuff, but maybe more about other things. Who knows? And I won't claim to speak for them, right? But at the same time, I just know that I felt deeply uncomfortable by the situation. Yes. And this many years later, when I thought about this topic, it was the first thing that came into my mind was that the discomfort that came with being told all the many reasons why birth control is a terrible choice for you.
Being dismissed. I mean, I think any doctor without a uterus, right? I think any human without a uterus should have to get one of those, those things that they're like the fake cramps. They're like those electrodes, and they put them on, and then they crank it from 0 to 10, but just for cramps. And they have like what like endometriosis feels like. Mm-hmm. I feel like every single month, everyone without a uterus should have to wear that for at least 2 days straight.
At least 2 days. Yeah.
Yeah.
Minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
So that then maybe they could treat all uterus owning humans with a little bit more respect and understanding.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And how many things we have to do with that kind of pain every month.
Every month. Right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of a separate. We did get into this in our anxiety as a woman, part 1 and 2. Y'all can go back in our feed and check those episodes out if you haven't yet. I believe they were both from the spring. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but if you scroll back, a little in
TMI too.
Yes. Yeah. It comes up a lot. Unfortunately, there's lots of anxiety as girls and females and women. I
mean, it happens to us monthly.
Yeah. Monthly. It's hard to ignore.
Yeah.
It's really hard to ignore.
And we still have to function in society like everyone else every month.
Exactly.
From the time we're like 12.
Yeah. Since we're tweens, basically. All right, warriors. So, I think that it would be just maybe like an interesting or fun exploration or experiment for you to take some time today or this week and kind of reflect on your own experience with maybe the healthcare system, maybe just, something physical you went through and you were concerned about sharing it with others, going to a doctor because of it. Did you gaslight yourself? Were you gaslit by those healthcare professionals? Were you worried about being too much or a burden or making a bigger deal out of something that needed to be made a bigger deal out of? Mm-hmm. If anything that, you kind of heard from us today made you feel anything about this, maybe good to journal on or sit in meditation with, or take yourself for a walk or
hop on an email and email us your story.
Yeah. True. It's because I feel like with all the things that we've shared about on this podcast, we talk about our physical and mental health the most, obviously, and how much attention gets paid by doctors, typically more so to physical health than mental health. And of course, our show is about anxiety. And so we talk a lot more about, the kind of emotional weight and baggage that comes with anxiety. But we've spent a lot less time talking about its physical manifestations when it comes to all of it, but certainly when dealing with our messed up healthcare system. And if you're not from this country and your healthcare system does things differently than ours, we'd love to hear that too, right? Like, what are the ways that are not working for you in your country? What are the ways that it is working? Because we know it's not perfect anywhere. But yeah, I mean, so we think you should take a few minutes or a while to think about it this week. Yeah. All right, warriors. Abby is going to share her win of the week.
So if you've been a longtime listener, you know that I love the Denver Zoo. I love it. I love painted dogs. They take a lot of animals in and, it's not like a horrible zoo, like when I would grow up and be like, oh, these poor animals are in cages. And to be fair, yes, there's animals in cages, but it's like to rehabilitate and to protect certain species and everything. It's like really well done. Some of the enclosures, you don't even get to see the animals because it would stress out the animals, like the tigers. So it's like, never even seen the tigers when I've gone to the zoo because they want to keep the tigers, emotionally safe. Right. So I love the zoo. So I follow them on Instagram, and in their stories, they were having a giveaway. So I clicked on it. I went to their website and I put in my information and I won 5 free tickets to the zoo.
Woo!
So I'm going
5 tickets.
5. And I really love the zoo. It's outdoors. You see a lot of animals. You can buy a stuffed animal at the end. The zoo is amazing. And so I'm going with Sarah.
Nice.
Zane is going to be in town with my cousin Garrett. So they're coming. Yeah.
That's going to be like an Anxiety Warriors mini reunion.
I know.
Shout out to Sarah Bartlett and Zena Minkara. 2 former guests from our show, one from season 1, one from season 2.
Yep.
Love. That is awesome. What a huge win.
Yeah. So I'm excited.
Woohoo.
Yeah. I won and I'm winning again.
Yeah.
I won the tickets and it's going to be a win when we go.
And you're bringing other people into the winner's circle.
Yeah.
It's not just a win for you. It's a win for everyone that gets a free ticket.
Ooh, that's right.
Love.
Yes.
I can't wait to see pictures. That is so exciting.
Yes. There'll be loads.
Yay. Awesome. All right. Well, warriors, we love you so much. Take some time to think about this topic that we shared with you this week. If you'd like to connect with us for any reason, you can find us on Instagram. We're at Anxiety Warriors Podcast, or you can email us at anxietywarriorspodcast@gmail.com. You can shout out your wins of the week. You can give us topic ideas, things that you'd love to hear us chat about on the show. If you think you'd be a great fit as a guest, or you're a warrior, you have a story to share, we'd love to hear from you, get you on the calendar to come on Zoom and chat with us about your story. And please take 2 seconds, smash that 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're tuning in right now. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then hop into our show notes and click that Threadless merch shop. Grab yourself some Anxiety Warriors Podcast merch to support our show in style.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for going on this journey with us. We are so grateful we get to do this with you all every week.
We love you. Till next time.